Kanon is the quintessential winter story. And that's partly because every scene in Kanon's cozy little town is plastered with a thick layer of snow. But all this wintry scenery is so much more than a visual quirk. Kanon's setting is integral to its vision about life and nature, and of humanity's place therein. In the most simple terms, winter in Kanon is a time of death, and the different characters' attitudes towards winter reveal much about their state of mind and the way they deal with adversity. Hello, my name is Sean, and I break down what makes great stories tick. Now, this is the second part of my series on the Kanon visual novel, but don't worry if you haven't seen the first video. As long as you know the basic plot of Kanon, you can watch this on its own as well. Anyways, Kanon is a story that's filled with death. Most notably, almost all of its routes end with the death of that route's main heroine. But even before all of that, all of Kanon's present-day events are the result of two deaths during that crucial winter 7 years ago that changed the course of protagonist Yuichi Aizawa's life forever. First of all, a death sparked the most important meeting in all of Kanon. 7 years ago, Yuichi was suddenly confronted by a young girl, Ayu Tsukimiya, who burst into tears in the middle of the shopping center. To onlookers, it seemed like Yuichi was bullying her, and so he felt that he had to comfort her to make sure that she was alright. And it's only later that we actually find out why she was crying, that the reason of Ayu's sudden outburst was that she had just lost her mother. And it's also implied that she will soon have to move away from her beloved town, maybe to a foster family or an orphanage or something. Either way, she ends up befriending Yuichi, and it's his company that helps her through these difficult times. In her own words, Yuichi is the only reason that she could keep smiling. And then there's a second death, that of Ayu, the event that scarred Yuichi for life and made him seal away the memories of his time in that cozy town. And it's really important how much the game leans on wintry metaphors during Ayu's death scene. Or maybe I shouldn't be calling it a death scene, because more accurately, as we find out at the end of the game, this is the moment where Ayu has fallen into a coma, and she's left lying in the hospital for all these years. Now, when Ayu is falling from a tree, she is compared to a snowflake descending to Earth. But right after this comparison, Kanon's narration does something interesting. It blurs the boundary between the image, in this case a snowflake, and the subject of comparison, that being Ayu falling to her death. The game reveals that there actually was a pile of snow that fluttered down from the branch as well. So this moment is giving us the impression that Ayu is, in a way, becoming one with nature, and that there's no clear distinction between the little girl and the snow falling from the tree. And the irony here is that Ayu's fate, in a way, grants her one of her wishes. Because there's an earlier scene where Ayu wished for this scenery to be preserved forever, that the snow would never melt. And the reason for this is that she's afraid of having to move herself and projecting her fear of change onto the landscape. And through her fall, Ayu, in a way, did manage to preserve the snow. Because at this moment, time itself froze still. And for Ayu, the snow remained intact ever since. By falling into a coma, she herself has been frozen in time, like a puddle frozen by the snow, and Ayu blended together with the wintry scenery she adored. And the game continues to blur the distinction between the figurative and the literal. After Ayu has fallen to her supposed death, we're told that she looks like she's sleeping, with the snow serving as a pillow of sorts. In this case, Ayu's body has literally fallen onto a layer of snow, but the metaphor also anticipates how she will soon fall into an eternal sleep, frozen in time, as symbolized by the fact that she's lying on top of a frozen mass of snow. Now, you may be thinking that I don't need to spell out these metaphors that we all understand on an intuitive level. But for me, it's important to make clear how Kanon persistently uses its wintry imagery, and that it's much more potent than you might think at first glance, because it feeds into one of the most important ideas of Kanon's overarching philosophy, that being that human life is intrinsically connected to the circle of life at large, a cycle that is consistently represented through the passing of the seasons. In the world of Kanon, humanity's lot is subject to the ordinances of nature. No matter how much some of its characters try to resist, life and death follow the ebb and flow of the natural cycle. And so, although the story of Kanon only spans a 3-week period in January, the game includes references to the cycle of the seasons at some of its most critical junctions. Moreover, the passing of the seasons is of major importance on a structural sense to the ending of every route in the game. All of these conclude with the death of sorts, so we have Shiori succumbing to her illness, Mai committing suicide, Akiko being critically injured, Makoto's lifespan running out, and Ayu's ghost disappearing. But then, after all these tragedies, the game flashes forward to the advent of spring for an epilogue that offers us a happy end. We're told that Shiori and Mai and Akiko all miraculously recover. And in Ayu's case, it's first revealed that she didn't actually die from the fall, but has been lying in a coma for all these years. And then we hear that she has finally awoken from her slumber. And at the tail end of the Makoto route, which, is a joke because Makoto is a fox and everything. Yeah, okay. In any case, it's suggested here that Makoto may have been born anew as well. Now, all of these endings could be chalked up as deus ex machinas, as examples of bad writing. But in my view, that's missing the symbolic point the game is making here. Kanon is emphasizing the close connection between its story beats and the passing of the seasons. Winter is a time of death and despair, and spring the time of birth and renewal. In other words, what Kanon is doing is raise the realities of the human condition to a poetic extreme, and tie the circle of life to the rhythm of the seasons. In its internal logic, the figurative rebirth of its heroines is just as natural and inevitable as the way that snow melts and makes place for cherry blossom petals. And the association between human life and the waxing and waning of the seasons is also brought out by a naming pattern of the Minase family, the beating heart of Kanon's world. Akiko's name literally means autumn child, whereas the yuki in Nayuki is the word for snow. So, symbolically, Kanon is presenting the generational succession from the mother Akiko to the daughter Nayuki as a human counterpart to autumn giving way to winter. The route which most explicitly addresses the significance of the seasons is that of Makoto. Halfway through the storyline, Yuichi uncovers the true identity of this girl with amnesia. She's actually a fox who had given up her life to become human for a short time. And even though Yuichi never reveals this truth to Makoto directly, Makoto feels on an intuitive level that her clock is ticking. It seems that this is linked to her being a fox, that she's even more acutely attuned to the ordinances of nature than the human characters in Kanon. And of all the characters in the game, it's only Yuichi and Makoto who continuously despise the wintry cold that they're forced to endure day after day. For Yuichi, this is because he subconsciously associates winter with his traumatic memory of seeing Ayu die before his eyes. And for Makoto, the frigid temperatures remind her that she doesn't have much time left. Makoto says that spring can't come soon enough. In fact, if she had it her way, spring would last forever. And this makes sense, right? Because spring is the time of life, of rejuvenation. And with that, it's also Makoto's last hope of survival. But in the end, all her wishes prove futile, and Makoto's life runs its course after all. We learn that the circle of life is not concerned with the survival of any individual, but with the preservation of species as a whole. And so, with the advent of spring, the foxes return to the hill where Yuichi met Makoto, and new life is born again. What's unique about the ending of this route is that it doesn't conclude with a reunion between Yuichi and the person he lost. Instead, we get a dialogue between Yuichi and Nishio, who is another person who befriended a fox that had turned into a human. And in this route, Nishio starts as a broken individual. She has become a husk of her former self ever since the death of the fox person that she had loved. But at the very end of the route, the two finally come to terms with their grief and acknowledge that life and death is both part of the natural cycle. So, unlike most of Kanon's other storylines, which are resolved by a miracle that transcends even death itself, the route that began with the miracle concludes by having the characters truly accept that even a miracle cannot last and that death is itself inevitably part of life. This association between winter and death is also highly important to the flashback at the end of the Mai route. We learn here that Mai's mother had been sickly for most of her daughter's life, and that therefore she spent a lot of time in the hospital. One day, Mai brought some snow inside so that her mother could play with it. Mai's mom is delighted by this and turns it into a snow bunny. But, as you probably predicted, her work soon melts away in the heated hospital room. And this scene here at first seems like a simple metaphor, as if the fate of the snow bunny prefigures what will inevitably befall Mai's mom herself. And similarly, the next scene also suggests that the fateful moment is close at hand. One day, Mai's mom suggests that they visit the zoo, which is something the two of them had been hoping to do all this time. But it soon turns out that such a far trip is much too taxing for Mai's mom. The two of them barely get further than the hospital, and the young girl needs to support her mom all the way. And soon enough, Mai's mother has to sit down on a bench and falls asleep. By now, it's clear that there is no way that the two of them will ever reach the zoo. But Mai doesn't give in. When her mother wakes up, she finds that Mai has been busy making their dream come true. Mai has been building a zoo of sorts here in the snow, an entire herd of snow bunnies. And then the game jumps forward. Mai is standing in the hospital hallway, crying for her mother. So this seems to frame the part before with the snow bunnies in the zoo as a touching death scene, right? The final moment between mother and daughter. This is just typical Key pulling at her heartstrings at every turn. Except, this time, it's not. Mai never gave up hope that her mother would get better, just like she never gave up reaching the zoo. And then, a miracle happened. Mai's mom actually recovered. That day, Mai awakened some kind of supernatural power, an ability to heal others or to bring the dead back to life. The game's kind of vague here on the exact scope of the abilities, but this is about what it boils down to. But the strange thing is that Mai horrifies everyone with the miracle she brought about. And since that day, the two of them, mother and daughter, are known as the Devil's Family, and they are ostracized wherever they go. And as a result, Mai grew to despise her power. So, What's going on here? Why would someone who can restore the dead not be welcomed with open arms? What I think here is that this too is drawing on the way that humans in Kanon are highly attuned to the seasonal cycle. Mai brought life in the season of death, and in doing so, she defied the very laws of nature. But even these extraordinary powers can't resist the immutable balance of life and death forever. Although Mai managed to save her mother, that miracle came with a hefty price. Her abilities lead others to demonize Mai, and as a result, her restorative powers were warped into a force of destruction, into actual demons that claimed the lives of Mai's friend Sayuri, and eventually of Mai herself. It's almost as if nature is settling a score, correcting the course that the young girl had briefly managed to upset. And all this brings us to Kanon's most wintry heroine, Shiori Misaka, the girl who had been diagnosed with an incurable illness. Shiori knew that her days were numbered for over a year, and that only a miracle can save her at this point. But in her view, they're called miracles because they don't happen. And this makes Shiori somewhat unique among all the characters in Kanon. Although all the routes end with a death of sorts, Shiori is the only one who knows exactly what lies in store for her and actively withholds the secret from Yuichi at the beginning of the route. At this point, she has fully accepted her fate, and she even flirts with the cold embrace of death. And so, Shiori is also the character who is most strongly associated with snow and winter, with the season of death. Snow serves as an important metaphor in her routes to hint at things to come as early as her introduction scene. This takes place on the game's second day. Yuichi and Ayu have met up, and Ayu bumps into a tree. And by doing so, she knocks down a pack of snow, which falls right on top of an unexpected girl who just happened to pass by, this being Shiori, of course. The full metaphorical significance of this introduction, however, only becomes apparent at the end of the route. In her last moments with Yuichi, Shiori reveals that she had actually intended to commit suicide that day. She had set out to buy a knife, and she encountered Yuichi and Ayu as she was heading home. So, Shiori's story begins at a point where she could no longer bear her figurative burden. And this is illustrated by how she collapsed under a literal burden of snow. The substance, significantly, that symbolizes death throughout the game. This scene also associates Shiori with snow in another way. Her skin is said to be almost paler than snow, which hints at her sickly condition and suggests that she's already at death's doorstep. And this is by far the only moment where the game draws attention to her snow-like pallor. In particular, there are two scenes here. One where she shoots down Yuichi's desperate hope that she might recover, and the other where she eventually succumbs to her illness. But what's remarkable about this girl, who has given up all hope of recovery, is that she actively seeks out the snow. Yuichi meets Shiori for the second time when he spots her waiting in the school's snow-swept courtyards, which is an act of sheer insanity in the middle of such a frigid winter. But unlike Yuichi, Shiori proclaims that she loves the snow. She invites Yuichi to build a snowman with her, and she challenges him to a snowball fight. And to top that off, the two of them at one point discuss lunch plans, and she notes that the snow to her actually looks quite tasty. But since snow isn't particularly filling, she settles on the closest thing to that, a tub of vanilla ice cream. Now, in Kanon, every heroine has a favorite food that they keep getting throughout the game. But unlike quintessential winter foods like Ayu's taiyaki or Makoto's nikuman, Shiori's love for ice cream is remarkably inappropriate for the time of year. I mean, who would want to eat ice cream in the middle of January? At one point, she offers Yuichi some ice cream as well, And Yuichi, a person who despises the cold, promptly upsets his stomach. So, if this weren't the most inappropriate metaphor for this given context, I'd be saying that Shiori is here playing with fire. Since she believes that her fate is sealed either way, she might as well savor the taste of death.
Actually quite good. Can't blame her.
But once Yuichi learns the truth about her condition, Shiori's cool starts melting away. The two of them meet at Shiori's favorite park, basked under the gleaming moonlight. In front of them, there's a fountain that keeps running all through the night so that its sparkling waters don't freeze over. And here, with her secret finally out of the bag, Shiori acknowledges that, at least to a certain extent, all this love for snow was just a facade. In truth, she was never unfazed by the cold, and she was also well aware that ice cream is not really something you should be eating at this time of year. But, well, it's not like she had the luxury to wait until the summer. So in part, the way she embraced all things winter, all those symbols of death, was her way of coping with the knowledge that soon she would be no more. And this is the kind of detail that best captures the essence of Shiori Misaka, and what makes her one of my all-time favorite characters. On first glance, Shiori is witty and quirky, but as you get to know her better, you find out that she's also someone who is acutely self-aware and actively crafting her own persona. She only occasionally allows you glimpses of the real Shiori, of a girl who's actually harboring excruciating sadness underneath her mask. And once you learn the truth about her, you start realizing how the boundary between her cheer and her sorrow has been razor thin all along, and that maybe even Shiori herself can't properly distinguish between the two of them anymore. And as the ultimate capstone of her facade, Shiori also likes to blur the boundaries between reality and fiction. She likes to act as if her meetings with Yuichi aren't real events, but scenes from a film. So, during their first meeting in the courtyard, Shiori assumes that Yuichi must be excited to meet someone like her, a mysterious girl who's been off sick for ages. After all, this is just like a scene from a drama. And there are multiple moments where she asks Yuichi if he liked her lines, and she gets upset when he isn't duly impressed by the ones she's most proud of. Most notably of all, there's the moment where the two visit Shiori's park, and Shiori leads Yuichi on by commenting that this is just like a scene from a drama. Specifically, like a kiss scene. And this is what prompts Yuichi to confess his feelings for her. But, as always with Shiori, there's a tragic truth behind her quirks. When Yuichi notes that she seems to be watching a lot of dramas, she remarks that, well, she has plenty of time to do so. After all, she has been stuck at home for over a year, with little else to do than reading and watching television. And so, it's no wonder that Shiori clings to a fiction. Treating her own life as a fictional narrative serves as another form of escapism from the terrifying truth that is staring her in the face. The kiss scene she suggests might be cliched, but that doesn't really matter. For Shiori, fiction is something that allows people to dream of a world with happy endings, because real life is hard enough as it is. After all, she is the one person who has given up all hope of recovery, the only one who outright rejects the miraculous in a world filled with miracles. And since she firmly believes that her fate is sealed, the only thing she can decide for herself is how she will go out. And so, even though there are a few moments where Shiori's mask cracks, she has consigned herself to her role and does everything in her power to keep up the act until her final bow. In particular, there's one illusion that she obsessively holds up, that she will always be smiling until the bitter ends. Smiling a haunting smile that cuts deep into Yuichi's heart, and that she will never shed a single tear. At first, Yuichi assumes that this is because her tears have long run dry. But he slowly learns that this isn't the case. It's not that Shiori can't cry anymore. Rather, she seems to be constantly fighting to suppress the tears that threaten to overwhelm her at any moment. But the thing is, the narration of Kanon depicts her recourse to art as a means of escapism as something that's fundamentally misguided. And in this light, it's also significant that Shiori is a bit of an artist herself. Earlier in the route, she reveals that she used to draw quite a bit, and at one point, she shows Yuichi some of her work. But, to his surprise, her pictures are completely incomprehensible, and that even though Shiori is striving for realism. So, when Kanon portrays Shiori's artistic attempts as a failure, it suggests that her fervent efforts to subsume the role of a tragic heroine are deeply flawed as well. Most importantly, Shiori's insistence that miracles don't happen has actually already been refuted since the beginning of the story's timeline. There has actually been a miracle that unfolded right before her eyes, a miracle that she's willfully ignored in favor of her own fiction. It took place on the day of her chance encounter with Yuichi and Ayu. Shiori was sitting alone in her room at night, the knife she had bought that afternoon in hand, and she took the step to end her life. But suddenly, her mind returned to the banter of the two strangers she had met that afternoon. And then she found herself laughing like she hadn't laughed for so long, and then crying all the tears that she had laughed away, all the tears that she had held back for over a year. And all of a sudden, her wound was healed. And so when she looks back, even Shiori has to quietly acknowledge that she had witnessed a miracle that day. And ever since, Shiori has been changing. As the days pass, the deathly cold she used to embrace gives way to warmth. She starts laughing again, and her smile begins to thaw out her frozen exterior. And after Shiori starts dating Yuichi in earnest, she also gets permission to attend school again for the final days of her life. And so they say farewell to their lunch breaks in the frosty courtyard, and they start meeting in the school's toasty canteen. Little by little, Shiori starts clinging to life, until, in her final moments, she realizes that she doesn't want to die anymore, that there is still so much left to live for. Yet, despite all of this, Shiori still can't bring herself to believe in miracles, even when she lies on death's doorstep, which is symbolically represented by her collapsing into the snow. But here's the thing. Once you start understanding Kanon's underlying ideas about life and death, the way Shiori frames the issue seems flawed from the start. Shiori never needed a miracle in the first place. All she needed to believe in was a simple fact of life, that even the longest, coldest winter eventually comes to an end and makes way for spring. And it's particularly significant on this front that the day where Shiori is hospitalized is also the first day of a new month. In other words, a moment of transition in Kanon's seasonal cycle, demarcating that the period of death and decay is slowly running to a close, and that the season of birth and rejuvenation is no longer far off. And also, it's Shiori's birthday. Make of that what you will. I've called Kanon poetic before, and perhaps this might be a suitable moment to explain what I mean by this. For me, the sublime beauty of Kanon lies in the way this game heightens the most basic facts of life and transforms them into a source of wonder. It suggests that each of us is witness to all kinds of tiny miracles every day, without even realizing it. And even though individual people inevitably pass away, the seasons will always keep cycling on and bring new life in the process. And I don't know, for me, there's something strangely hopeful about all of this. If you've made it this far in the video, thanks again for tuning in. The next part of this series will focus on the role of family in Kanon, and the many fears and struggles that come with it. I'm hoping to do this video on top of my regular manga content, but I'm not quite sure what the timeline will be going forward. So if you want to catch the next installment, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing you again soon.